Hi everyone, I hope you're well and ready for another exciting live chat. And this week it's with the gorgeous Jessica Freer, and she's from the Complete Pet Company, and she'll be chatting to us this evening about our beautiful Dingo. So I'm Jenny Goldsby from the Complete Pet Company and Complete Canine Communication based in Brisbane. These two businesses and my incredible team, which Jessica is part of, provide services with up-to-date information and a common sense approach to help owners make informed decisions when it comes to a more natural approach to diet, health, behaviour and equipment. The Complete Pet Company has been producing the beautiful raw frozen dog and cat food called the Complete Meal for 18 years. We use all Australian ingredients and packaging and non-factory farmed animals, because we not only care about the cats and dogs eating the food, we also care about the well-being of the animals that we use to produce the food. And don't forget to check out our beautiful freeze-dried Complete Meal and freeze-dried offal. I'm also very passionate about helping people understand behaviour, calming signals and solving problems. I created Complete Canine Communication 14 years ago, and in that time, my journey has led me to different parts of the world where I've met some amazing people and made some great friends. I've also increased my knowledge through courses, talks and symposiums. One of these journeys was my trip to Spain, where I embarked on a 2-year course taught by none other than Turid Rugas, the international dog trainer from Norway. Learning from Turid validated a lot of the work I've been doing in Australia, and it filled in a lot of the missing gaps. I'm also excited to be able to bring you a lot of information through my workshops, talks, one-to-one consultations, and of course, our Facebook Lives, which we've been doing for quite a while now. Please feel free to ask questions in the comment section below, and we'll get to them at the end of Jess's presentation. And it'd be also really nice to find out where you are in the world. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Jess to you to do her first part of the 3-part presentation on dingoes. So welcome, Jess, and tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I work at the Complete Pet Company, as you said. I'm very passionate about what you do there. I have a little dog, a little mini schnauzer called Millie. And it was actually Millie that brought us to the Complete Pet Company last year, and our journey with her started, and I learned a whole new different way of thinking about dogs and all animals, and it's really changed my perception of, dogs, how we treat them, how we view them. I'm really privileged to be involved in the work that Jenny does, and to get to do research like this on dog breeds and dingoes. I'm also very passionate about natural approaches as we advocate at the Complete Pet Company. And yeah, I'm really excited to be doing this talk for you.
Wow, that was good advertising, Jess. Well done.
You're welcome.
So, look, some of you may be wondering like how this live came about. I mean, obviously we work with dogs in all different aspects of that. But part of my work, with helping people understand dogs more, is also understanding a little bit about the breed of the dog that they have. So we have breed sheets at work. So we're constantly updating those, and so we can share that with owners of dogs so they can find out a little bit about what their dog is, why it's designed the way it is, why it has long legs, long in body, short in body, wide mouth, long muzzle, all those things, put together. So it's not about doing a breed sheet research where hitting Google just to find out that it might, your dog is good with cats or great with children and doesn't bark. We know all about that one, don't we, Jess?
Yeah.
Bark. So on that, with those breed studies, I get Jess to do those, and I do them also. And I said to her, because I'm quite interested in the dingo and its behaviour, how it communicates. So I said to Jessica, would you research the dingo for me? So she started to do that, and wow, did she do it? she really went into the dingo, and I just said to her, Jess, you need to present this. I think this is fascinating work. And that's sort of how it all came about. And Jess, tell me, researching the dingo, how's that been for you?
Well, I thought it would be pretty simple, like the rest, well, not simple, but similar to the rest of the dog breeds, do a little bit on their history and then carry on from there. But when I started to really research, it was so much more complicated than that. And I got really into it and really fascinated and had to know, like, you know, all about that part and all about the history and all about, you know, the different theories, etc. So that's how it kind of became bigger than a breed sheet. So I found the history really fascinating and how it wasn't as straightforward as I thought or everybody else thinks. And then also started to research, obviously, their characteristics and then where we are with them today. And that was probably the hardest part of it emotionally, because where we are with them today is quite sad, and having to face those facts of, you know, where the dingo, like what the dingo used to be like and where it is now, and some of the things we've done to them has been, yeah, really hard to kind of watch or read about. Yeah, but I think it's something that we need to know about, and we need to know about this incredible animal that's part of Australia, because otherwise soon I think we're going to lose it.
Okay, so I think on that note, we'll just get straight into it, Jess. So I'm going to mute myself, and I think we're going to hide the video for both of us so people have got a beautiful big screen. So this is part one, and it's about the history and origin of our beautiful wild dingo. So I hope you enjoy it like I will, and questions at the end, and we'll see how we go.
Okay, well, I'll share the presentation now. Jenny, let me know if it doesn't go right.
Sure. Perfect. We can see the beautiful first slide that says the dingo, history and origin. If you need me, Jess, just yell out and I'll come back on.
I will do. I'll turn my video off now too.
Okay.
Okay, so first part on the dingo, its history and origins. So I thought actually that before I started talking about the history of the dingo, it would be good quickly just to touch on the name of the dingo, the scientific name that we use to describe our dingo, because there's actually a couple of different classifications commonly used, and it's a little bit confusing. I found it a little bit confusing, so I thought I'd just explain that at the start. So the dingo was first given a scientific species name in 1793. So a long time ago. It was originally called the Canis dingo, so classified as its own separate species. The name was then later changed to Canis lupus dingo, a subspecies of the wolf Canis lupus lupus. And this was mainly because in the scientific naming system, it was becoming more of a trend to categorize domestic animals as subspecies of their wild ancestors. And now it was believed that the dingo was a possible ancestor of our current day domestic dogs. However, we know that dogs descended from wolves, so that put the dingo in a bit of a tricky place. And so that's why researchers placed the dingo name into the category of subspecies of the wolf, Canis lupus dingo. It's sometimes called Canis familiaris dingo, which suggests a link to domestic dogs, Canis familiaris. However, that name is rarely used. And recently, scientists are actually proposing that the name should be changed back to Canis dingo, so to classify it as its own separate canine species again. And many people that would believe that would actually help in their conservation as well, to separate them completely from domestic dogs and allow for their recognition and protection in the law as an individual species. So that's a little bit about the name of the dingo, just to start off with. And now we'll go into the history of the dingo, which is really fascinating. So I thought that I'd begin with what we have always believed about the history of our dingo. So if you do a quick Google search on general information on the dingo, as I did in the beginning, this is likely the brief history you will read on many web pages out there. So it's always been believed that the dingo evolved from the grey wolf in Asia, was brought to Australia by sailors from Asia, and this happened about 4,000 years ago. However, this pretty simple and clear theory about the origins of the dingo is now being challenged by more recent scientific and genetic research. And it's really fascinating when you start reading deeper how much more complex the dingo's history is and how many possible scenarios there are surrounding how they arrived here, whether they have been in Australia much longer than we initially thought, how they got here exactly. And the more I read, the more I wanted to know and find out. And when I really started to research the history, read various genetic studies and pieces of research, I actually came across several different possible theories around how exactly the dingo came to be in Australia. So it's not as straightforward as we initially thought. I thought the easiest way for me to organise this to present to you would be if I talked about the different theories presented by each piece of research one by one, and discuss what each new piece of research that I read contributed to this picture that I was trying to build about where the dingo really came from. So I read a couple of genetic studies on the dingo, which genetic studies analyse the DNA of the dingo in comparison to other dogs in other countries and also the wolf, to make conclusions about their origins and where they came from. And then a couple of other pieces of scientific research I read as well that presented some interesting findings. So I'm going to talk about each study or piece of research one by one and what each presented, and then what each new piece of research brought to the table on the picture of the history of the dingo. And with each slide where I talk about the research, I've just put the names of the studies at the bottom. So the first genetic study that I wanted to talk about was done in 2004, and the findings from this research supported that the dingoes originated from Asia, and their genetics showed specifically East Asia. Interestingly, the researchers also stated that the dingo's genetic makeup highly suggests that they descended from domestic dogs. And this is actually a little bit of a grey area because, as I just said at the start of the presentation, it's always been stated that the dingo evolved from the grey wolf in Asia. Now we know that all dogs and canines evolved from the wolf, so we know that the dingo, yes, has evolved from the wolf. What this new genetic research was saying is that it's highly likely the dingo descended from domestic dogs in East Asia. And it can be a bit of a point of contention because obviously they're not inferring that the dingo evolved from our current day highly domesticated dogs. So it all really depends on your definition of domestic. We use the word domestic to describe today's domesticated pet dogs, but the word has also been used to describe, for example, when wolf was first domesticated by man. So that's why that statement's a little bit of a grey area. There's also debate in the dingo research world over whether they were already domesticated or partly domesticated when they arrived in Australia and then went wild when they colonised Australia, or whether they have always been truly wild. And all I can do is kind of present both sides of the point because we can't make a conclusion on it. Because as I said, it's a grey area and it all really depends on what we mean when we say domestic dogs. Moving on, the genetic research also found that the dingo's entire DNA originates from haplotype A29. And a haplotype simply means a group of genes. It's a set of DNA that's often commonly inherited in combination with each other. So basically, all of the dingo's genetic makeup originally comes from this one group of genes that researchers have named A29. The majority of dingoes carry this genetic sequence, A29, and any other genetic sequences found in dingo individuals only vary from this A29 sequence by one substitution. That probably sounds a bit confusing because it's a bit genetic terminology, but what it simply means is that any other genetic sequence that occurs in individual dingo's DNA is a consequence of just one mutation step away from A29. So overall, that means that the dingo has very limited genetic variance. Its gene pool is very small. And this suggests a couple of things about the history of our dingo. Firstly, either the entire dingo population that exists today evolved from a very small group of initial dogs, and it's possible that they evolved from even just one pregnant female. Or the other option is the dingo lost genetic variance due to bottlenecks that occurred in the population somewhere in its travels, and a bottleneck is a sudden drop in the overall size of a population of a species. So a sudden reduction in the overall size of the species would reduce the gene pool, and if that occurred several times, it could result in the really limited genetic variance that we see in the dingo today. And that could have occurred during the dingo's travels over to Australia. Now, I said previously that it's always been believed the dingo came to Australia about 4,000 years ago, but genetic data is starting to suggest different estimates for that. And it's interesting, in the genetic studies, they use this really scientific genetic data that they have to create an estimate of a date range of when the dingo came to Australia, which I personally just find really hard to comprehend how they do that. But it's a good job that they do, because they give us some information on when the dingo possibly arrived in our country. So this study actually concluded two different possible estimates of when the dingo could come to Australia, depending on other evolutionary events that have occurred. So either they came to Australia between 4,600 and 5,400 years ago, which is dependent on a wolf-coyote split in evolution of 1 million years ago, or between 4,600 and up to 10,800 years ago, which depends on a wolf-coyote split of 2 million years ago in evolution. So basically, the genetic data from this study suggests that the dingo could have come to Australia anywhere between 4,600 and 10,800 years ago, which is a big date range. So they concluded that it most likely arrived in Australia approximately 5,000 years ago. The researchers from this study also proposed that the dingo's arrival in Australia could be related to the most recent human migration across continents, called the Austronesian Expansion, so the expansion of the Austronesian culture. They stated that when the Austronesian culture spread from China into island Southeast Asia, it could have taken the dingoes with it, which does suggest that they were brought over to Australia by human means, by sailors. So that's what the first piece of genetic research gave me about the history of the dingo, that they did originate from East Asia, that they possibly descended from domestic dogs, depending on the definition of domestic, and that their entire DNA comes from this one group of genes, A29, so they have a very limited genetic variance. they could have come to Australia anywhere between 4,600 and 10,800 years ago. And their arrival in Australia might be related to the Austronesian culture spreading from China down through Asia and then into our part of the world. So the next study that I read presented some really new, interesting findings. This study was conducted in 2011, and it actually looked at the origins of both the dingo and Polynesian dogs, so dogs in Polynesia. So we know already from what I've just talked about that all of the dingo's genes originally come from this one gene group called A29. Now in Polynesian dogs, and I will talk about the Polynesian dogs briefly because their history is also related to that of the dingo. In Polynesian dogs, they identified two genetic sequences, and they're called ARC1 and ARC2. So in this research, they tested the DNA of samples of dogs from different countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And what they found was all three genetic sequences, so A29 found in the dingo, and ARC1 and ARC2 from the Polynesian dogs, were identified in dogs from China, mainland Southeast Asia, and Indonesia, but not in any dogs from Taiwan or the Philippines. And they concluded that that suggests it was unlikely the dingo came to Australia during the Austronesian expansion, because the Austronesian expansion is believed to have begun in Taiwan and the Philippines. So there's no genetic traces of dingo or Polynesian dogs in Taiwan or the Philippines. So therefore it's highly unlikely they came during the Austronesian expansion, the largest human migration. Now, I think this study refers to the Austronesian expansion in a little bit of a different way to the previous one. The previous researchers are talking about the spread of the Austronesian culture from China, and that could have taken the dingoes with it. Whereas these researchers are referring to what is known as the Austronesian expansion in the scientific world, which is believed to have started in Taiwan and the Philippines. So from what I can gather, they're saying it's unlikely that the dingo came to Australia during the Austronesian expansion, because if they did, there would be genetic traces of the dingo and Polynesian dogs in Taiwan and the Philippines. The theory that they present is that dingoes originated in China. So A29, the dingo genetic sequence, was found in China, and they came to Australia down through mainland Southeast Asia and Indonesia, through all the countries where genetic traces of the dingo were identified. But we still ask ourselves, how exactly did they, travel here? And this piece of research talks about the dingo being the only possible evidence in Australia of contact with Neolithic cultures. And Neolithic refers to the last part of the Stone Age that occurred 12,000 years ago. So they could have arrived in Australia as a result of crossing paths with a Neolithic culture during the last part of the Stone Age, which suggests that the dingoes could have arrived in Australia as far back as 12,000 years ago, which is different again. However, there's also another really interesting part to this research, and that is that the genetic sequence A29, which is found in dingoes, was also identified in New Guinea singing dogs from Papua New Guinea. And therefore, it's thought that the New Guinea singing dog and the dingo share very similar origins. And where this fits into the theory on the history of the dingo and where the dingo came from is that the New Guinea singing dog comes from a part of Papua New Guinea called the pre-Neolithic New Guinea highlands, meaning that the New Guinea singing dog already existed in Papua New Guinea before the Neolithic culture had reached that country during the last ice age. So that suggests that dingoes came to Australia as a consequence of contact with pre-Neolithic cultures. So before the last Stone Age. Sorry, I think I said Ice Age before, I meant Stone Age. And the specific estimated time of arrival of dingoes in Australia from this genetic data was anywhere between 4,600 and 18,300 years before present. So even further back than the previous study estimated. So you can see, even after these first two pieces of research that I read, there's so many different pieces of information that are presented, and so many kind of conflicting and different theories as well. And the next slide I've got here is actually just a slide with the dingo and the New Guinea singing dog on it, because I thought it was really good to show how similar they actually are. I mean, they almost look identical, and therefore why researchers think they share very similar origins and why they would be very genetically linked. So the dingo is the one on the left and the New Guinea singing dog is the one on the right. So the last study that I talked about, to summarize, stated that dingoes unlikely came to Australia during the Austronesian expansion that occurred, because if they had done, there would be genetic traces of them in Taiwan and the Philippines. So therefore they travelled down from China through mainland Southeast Asia into Indonesia and Australia. And that it's likely this occurred as a result of Australia's contact with a pre-Neolithic culture. So before the last Stone Age, and dingoes could have come to Australia anywhere up to 18,300 years ago. And this is actually a map that I took from the last genetic study that I discussed on the dingoes and the Polynesian dogs, because I think it really helps to illustrate what I was talking about in regards to where the dingo's genetic sequence A29 was found, and therefore the possible route taken by the dingo to Australia. So you can see from the map, and I know it's not 100% clear, but the dingo sequence is the one in purple at the bottom, A29. And so you can see that one was found in South China, Southeast Asia, parts of Indonesia, and New Guinea, and obviously Australia. However, there was no genetic traces of the dingo in Taiwan, and no genetic traces of the dingo in the Philippines, which is really interesting. Okay, so those were the two main genetic studies that I read, but I also read, like I said, a couple of pieces of other scientific research. And one piece of research that I read presented some interesting thoughts on who could be responsible for bringing the dingo over to Australia. So in all previous research, there have been several culprits recognised for being responsible for introducing the dingo to Australia. So this is if the dingo did come to Australia with sailors, so by human means, then these are possible groups of people that could have brought them over. So Indian mariners, a group of people called the Lapita from Southeast Asia, traders from Taiwan and Timor, and also a group of hunter and gatherer people from Sulawesi in Indonesia, which you can see on the map there, called the Toalian Tribe. And through process of elimination, these researchers have narrowed it down to being the Toalian tribe as likely the most responsible for introducing the dingo to Australia. So firstly, it's not likely to be the Indian mariners, because we know from the genetic studies that the dingo originated from China. Secondly, there's no archaeological evidence of the Lapita group of people from Southeast Asia in Australia, so it's not likely to be them either. And it's also highly unlikely to be the traders from Timor or Taiwan. Firstly, because as we just discussed, there's no genetic traces of the dingo in Taiwan. But secondly, the dingoes don't have copies of a certain starch digestion gene, which other domestic dogs do have. So just quickly, dogs developed the starch digestion gene through living alongside agricultural groups of people, where they would eat foods that required them to break down small amounts of starches. And over many, many years of evolution, they developed this gene which did enable them to break down those small amounts of starches. Now, dingoes don't have this gene at all, so it suggests that they were never exposed to agricultural groups of people, never lived alongside agricultural groups of people, and were never exposed to that food, which, you know, domestic dogs obviously were. So this rules out the traders from Timor or Taiwan because they were groups of agricultural people. So eliminating all of those options, it only leaves the Toalian Tribe from Indonesia as the most likely to have brought the dingo to Australia. They propose that the Toalian could have picked up the dingo from Borneo because there's evidence that the two countries are quite historically linked before bringing it over to Australia. Artifacts show that the Toalian could travel by sea. And these researchers concluded from their findings that this happened approximately 4,000 years ago. So another date estimate again. And so the picture continues to get more complex and complex. And it's possible that what the two other studies that I read said is correct. They came down from China through mainland Southeast Asia into Indonesia, and then maybe they were brought over from Indonesia by this tribe from Sulawesi to Australia. They're all possibilities in the theory on the history of our dingo and how it came to be in our country. So after all of those pieces of research, I had several question marks around the history of the dingo. We had the question of the Austronesian expansion as presented by the first study when the Austronesian culture spread from China, but then the second study saying that it's unlikely they came during the Austronesian expansion because of the no genetic traces of the dingo in Taiwan or the Philippines. That piece of research then raised the possibility of them coming to Australia as a result of contact with pre-Neolithic cultures because they share similar origins to the New Guinea singing dogs who exist in the pre-Neolithic New Guinea highlands. And then we had another piece of research saying that it could have been the Toalian tribe from Sulawesi in Indonesia that brought the dingoes over to Australia by sea. And how do all of these theories fit with each other? Do they fit with each other? How do we make sense of it all? And it doesn't end there either. I then came across a couple of questions of fact or fiction in the information on our dingo. So one source that I read stated that the theory that dingoes were brought over to Australia by sailors was probably fiction because dingoes came to Australia thousands of years ago, we know that, and the long-haul sea vessels on which they would have travelled with the seamen were only invented some hundreds of years ago. So how could they have come to Australia on ships? So if they weren't brought over by sailors, then we have the question of whether they actually migrated themselves naturally. Could they have travelled throughout Southeast Asia across land bridges that existed at the time between the countries? And this is a plausible theory if they came to Australia as long as approximately 18,000 years ago, which the last genetic study that I was talking about did estimate that they could have come to Australia this far back. 18,000 years ago was when the last ice age, the Pleistocene, occurred. And during the last ice age, the sea levels dropped, and Australia and parts of Southeast Asia were connected by exposed land called the Sunda and the Sahul shelves. And you can see on the map on the right there, that land is indicated by the shaded lined parts. And also on the map on the bottom left, the lighter blue areas are land that would have been exposed and connecting the continents. So that exposed land would have allowed the dingoes to migrate down naturally from Southeast Asia into Indonesia and Australia. In fact, one other genetic study from 2016, so quite recent, does discuss this possibility of dingoes having migrated naturally to Australia. They state that the close genetic links between the dingo and the New Guinea singing dog, which we were talking about before, indicates that the dingo could have migrated naturally across from New Guinea, which you can see from the map. Papua New Guinea and Australia were very clearly connected by the Sahul land shelf. So that kind of makes sense because we know the New Guinea singing dog and the dingo are really genetically similar. So maybe the dingo came across from Papua New Guinea, migrated naturally over to Australia. That doesn't answer the question of how they got to Papua New Guinea, but that's where all of the other theories that I was talking about before on how they came down through Southeast Asia fit in. And then finally, just to make the picture even more confusing, we have archaeological evidence on the history of the dingo. So that being Aboriginal rock art and dingo fossils. Now, the oldest Aboriginal rock art illustrating dingoes is from approximately 3,500 years ago. It's located in Pilbara in Western Australia, and you can see that on the right there, the painting of man with his dingo. The oldest dingo fossils found in Australia have been analysed using carbon dating to be anywhere between 3,081 and 3,348 years old. They were discovered in 1960 in the Majura cave in the Nullarbor Plains, also in Western Australia. And the picture there is of one of those fossil specimens found in the Majura cave. So from both of these pieces of archaeological evidence, we can say that we know for certain that dingoes have existed in Australia for at least 3,500 years. That's the oldest piece of archaeological evidence that we have, and archaeological evidence gives us fact. It's not theory, it's hardcore fact. So we can say that dingoes have been in Australia for certain for at least 3,500 years. Now, interestingly, there's no dingoes or dingo fossils found in Tasmania at all. Dingoes are only found on mainland Australia, and there have been no dingo remains identified in Tasmania. So this means that when the dingoes colonised Australia, they never made it over to Tasmania. So either they came to Australia after Tasmania had split from the mainland completely, and after it had been cut off by rising sea levels, and that was approximately 12,000 years ago. So if they came to Australia after Tasmania had split from the mainland, then that suggests that they couldn't have come as far back as some of the genetic estimates of 18,000 years ago. Or the second possible theory is if they did come to Australia as far back as, say, 18,000 years ago, then they must not have made it that far across Australia to Tasmania by the time the land split. And the plausibility of that theory depends on how long it took the dingo to fully colonise Australia. although it's unlikely that it would have taken them thousands of years. It could have taken them hundreds of years. Some research information that I've read says even less than that, but it's unlikely that it would have taken them thousands of years. So that gives more credit to the theory that they came to Australia after Tasmania had split from the mainland. And so that makes the picture confusing even further, because some of the genetic studies give estimates of their time of arrival as far back as 18,000 years ago. And now we have archaeological evidence suggesting that they must have come after 12,000 years ago. So again, there's things that don't quite fit together. And so now I'd done all of this research, I had all of this information, I'd read all of these different possible theories, all of this genetic data, scientific journals, and now I had to try and put it all together. And to be honest with you, my head was really confused. I had theories and bits everywhere, and now I somehow had to try and piece it together a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. So when I started trying to fit all of the information together to try and create a clearer picture on the origins of the dingo, this is what I came up with. So firstly, we know that dingoes originated from China. All of the genetic evidence states that they originated from East Asia, specifically China. And if they originated from China, then they somehow had to travel down through Southeast Asia and Indonesia to get to Australia. That's pretty clear and straightforward. What isn't as straightforward is how exactly they got here. The research raises several different possibilities. Whether they did come as part of the Austronesian Expansion, which is unlikely given that it involved Taiwan and the Philippines, and there's no genetic evidence of dingoes there. Whether they ended up in Australia as a result of contact with pre-Neolithic cultures before the last part of the Stone Age. Whether they migrated naturally across land bridges that connected Southeast Asia and Australia. Did they come over from Papua New Guinea, the home of their close relative, the New Guinea singing dog, by themselves? Or were they brought to Australia on ships by sailors from somewhere in Asia and Indonesia? And was it the Toalian Tribe from Sulawesi in Indonesia that did bring them over here? We do know from all of the genetic analysis that the dingo either evolved from a very small original group of dogs or lost genetic variants due to bottlenecks that occurred in their population somewhere along the way. And we know that because all of the dingo's DNA, their entire genetic makeup, originates from one genetic sequence, A29. The archaeological evidence tells us for a fact that dingoes have existed in Australia for a minimum of 3,500 years. Although it's possible that they might have arrived earlier. There's lots of estimates around 5,000 years. Genetic data from all of the studies combined suggests anywhere between about 4,000 and 18,000 years before present, which is a big date range, and 18,000 years is a very long time ago. At the end of the day, there's so many different specific estimates on the arrival of the dingo in Australia that it's almost impossible to draw a conclusion on which one would be the most accurate. And the time of their arrival that you conclude depends on which theory you're looking at on how they got here. And which theory you're looking at on how they got here depends on when they came as well. And finally, we know that it's very likely that they are closely related to the New Guinea singing dog, and that the two share very similar origins as a result. And we've discussed the possibility that the dingo could have migrated to Australia across the Sahel land shelf connecting us with New Guinea. So at the end of the day, what can we conclude from all of this research on the history and origins of our beautiful dingo? Well, the bottom line is, everybody, that nobody really knows. We don't know. We don't know for sure when exactly the dingo arrived in Australia. Whether it was brought over by human means, by sailors, or whether it's made the journey over itself. And where directly it came to Australia from. We know it originated in China, but which country did it come directly to Australia from? Was it Papua New Guinea? Was it another part of Indonesia? We can only speculate on each of these. And the truth is, I don't believe we will ever know 100% for sure. We can only go off the evidence presented to us by the latest scientific research and continue to investigate and try and build a picture as best we can. The dingo has existed in Australia for thousands of years, and there's no way of knowing for certain how, why, or when they got here. The dingoes themselves know, but after all, we can't ask a dingo. So from all of this research, what I can say we do know for certain is that the dingo did originate from Southeast Asia. It has been in Australia for at least 3,500 years, as evident by the Aboriginal rock art and the carbon-dated dingo fossils. And in that time, it has become a key part of our ecosystem here in Australia, which I'll be discussing a bit more in the next couple of lives. So thank you for listening. That was my findings after lots of research and time spent reading about the history and origins of our beautiful dingo. Like I said, I thought it would be pretty simple to start off with, but what I found was a much more complex picture, and I became really fascinated and engrossed and had to know all the different possible theories surrounding how this beautiful animal made it across to our country. And then the next couple of slides, I've just got my references from the research for referencing purposes. So there you go. I'll stop sharing the slideshow now and put my video back on.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I am so proud of you. That was amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. A29. And what a great name for a dingo. A29. And also a wild dingo, not a pet dingo, a wild dingo.
Wild dingo.
And I just want to say, before I sort of have a little bit of a look about, you know, who's done what. Jessica,
yes,
you put so much work into that, and I saw your sweat and tears, and you know, we had a few comments along the way, which, you know, knocked you back a little bit, but you went out there, and I think you've done an incredible job, and you didn't muck around. You know, you didn't just get on Google and do some research. You had papers, and how many Word documents did you have at one stage, like pages? I remember you like screaming at me in the office about how many pages of notes you had on it.
Well, my Word documents on breadsheets normally end up being like, you know, a decent size anyway, but by the time I finished with the dingo, it was something like more than 5,000 words, and I think there's about 20 pages there of notes and, you know, websites and bullet points, and so
the dingo was a little bit harder than doing the Havanese.
Yeah.
No, was it the
Maltese.
The Maltese?
I thought the Maltese was, a challenging one. That wasn't, straightforward. But then I came into the Dingo and I was like, oh goodness, this is a lot more complex.
Yeah, because the Maltese is very
once I start on something, it's very hard to stop me. So
yeah, no, it was really, really interesting. So wow. And I'm so looking forward to part 2. Okay, so let's have a little look at what we've got here. I also wanted to mention someone on here, Jen Parker is here, and I'm really glad Jen's here because I follow her Facebook pages and she's extremely passionate about the dingo, and as she puts a lot of stuff up about what's happening with the dingo in Australia. So I'm really, really happy to see her here. And I'm sure, if there's any questions that someone asks, she can certainly help out. But I think you got a pretty good handle on this. Okay, so let's have a little look what we've got. We've got quite a few things. Lee Mullen says, looking forward to the next one. Karen says, thanks for presenting different perspectives from the research amassed. Lee Mullen's got lots of pickies of little dogs. Liana, wow, very interesting. Jessica, thank you for sharing. You did a lot of research. She absolutely did. What other comments have we got here? For some reason, there's quite a few. They're just not jolly well showing up online. I don't know why.
Whilst I remember, thanks to Jen Parker as well, she actually shared one of the pieces of research that I talked about. So thank you to her for that too.
Good. I'm pleased. Yeah, hang on. There's 16 comments, but for some reason, can you get in there, Jess, and see or not?
Hang on, I'll have to open my Facebook up.
It does this, and I don't know why it does it.
16 comments.
Yeah, but I can only see 1, 2, 3, 4.
I can see them more. Oh dear.
Can you? Why
yes.
Have
you got it displaying all the comments, Jenny? Yeah.
Yeah. Jessica, Jen Parker said, Jessica, you're so welcome. I just got that one. There was a couple of comments there that I wanted to read out, but I can't see them now, so hang on.
I can see one from Jen Parker saying, Jessica, thank you. You've done amazingly well. Thank you, Jen.
I've got Lee Mullen who says, impressed with the amount of research and level of accuracy.
Thank you.
Belinda, thank you. Belinda Streeting says, absolutely incredible research, Jessica, and your findings are so interesting, which most Australians were listening. Look forward to the next session. Which most Australians should be listening. Okay. Now. Julia says, yeah, I've got them now. For some reason, they're not up on mine, but Grace just brought something in here. Zach says, when we are hypothesizing on the arrival of the dingo to the land, we need to consider that all current theories are only based on the merit of the current data available. This will undoubtedly change over time as newly discovered data becomes available. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what you said, right, Jess? You can only go on what.
Yeah, and each piece of research that I discussed in each study was from, well, I started at the oldest one and worked my way forward. You could see how they each presented different findings. And yeah, of course, it can only be on the current research, and that's why I said we can only go off doing more research. And their arrival in Australia also depends, like I said, on other evolutionary events that occurred and our knowledge of those too. So
yeah,
definitely.
Good. Super interesting. Thank you. That's from Letty from Spain. We've got people from all over the place. Julia says, oh my Jess, I'm gobsmacked. Wow, how fascinating. What an amazing history the dingo has. You've got me hooked. Thank you for presenting such interesting information and comprehensive presentation. We are so lucky to sit back, listen, watch and learn from this as a result of all your thorough hard work. Can't wait for part 2. Me either. I wish we could do it now. No questions yet from me, but sure they'll come from part 2 and 3. P.S. Thanks, Jenny, for continuing to the breathe studies and encouraging Jess to join in, leading to this presentation. Don't worry, Julia, you'll be back at work soon. You'll be doing the breathe studies. Yeah. Zach says, well researched, good stuff. There you go, Jessica. Yes, see. Yes, see. Nuria from Spain also. See, the Spanish are here. New things to learn. Thanks for all the knowledge. Lee says, impressed with the amount of research and level of accuracy. Karen Paul, thanks for presenting different perspectives from the research. I read that. Okay, so, and Michelle Radford says, so the dingo came from China, maybe across that land bridge, and they split and went to New Guinea and Australia, maybe. Very interesting, she says.
Yeah, so we know that they like originally came from China because like initially originated from China. That's what the genetic data suggests. If to come down from China to Australia, they had to somehow travel through Southeast Asia. And then you have the different theories on whether they were brought over by sailors or whether they possibly came over naturally by the land that connected all of the different countries. The dogs in Papua New Guinea are called the New Guinea singing dogs. They're not exactly the same as the dingo, but they both share very similar origins because they both have that one genetic sequence that I was talking about, which is called A29, which is why researchers think that the dingo could have possibly come to Australia from Papua New Guinea, and they might have done that because the two countries were connected by land at some point. So I hope that makes things a little bit clearer for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you talking about, because I made lots of notes actually. But
I'm sure you did.
Yeah, when you were talking, look at this beautiful baby here. Where is it? Here.
Other side, Jenny, other side.
Yeah, other side. I know it's mirrored here. Oh, gorgeous. When you were talking about the sailors, yeah, I think that was, you know, I remember when you found that out, and you went, well, that can't be true because the ships weren't then.
Yeah.
So
it's really confusing because, you know, I read something like that, you know, it wasn't likely that they were brought over by sailors because, of course, the ships weren't around, you know, thousands of years ago. And, of course, there wouldn't have been ships around like 12,000 and 18,000 years ago, which the dingoes would have come across. But then, you know, research from 2016 talks about the possibility of them being brought over by the Toalian tribe that I was talking about from Indonesia, and that they had the means to travel by sea. So, and they say, you know, 4,000 years ago. So it's not as far back as 18,000 years ago, but it's still not hundreds of years ago either. So that's what I was kind of saying about, like, when you're researching and you find different pieces of information and they don't quite like fit in with each other. And then at the end of it all, like, I have to try and put it all together, and some of the pieces don't fit, and I don't think they'll ever fit.
No.
So.
No, and like you said, the only one that really knows is our dingo, and he's staying very quiet.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got this is this name again, Natalie from France. You can speak French, can't you? Is it Natalie? Nathalie? Natalie?
It would be Natalie, yeah.
Natalie. Sorry, Natalie, we're discussing your name on here. Remember last time. was really interesting. I'm looking forward to the next session from France. Okay, Karen Paul. Karen Paul says, we Ding people can be very hard to please. Jess, as dingoes are so very much persecuted and misunderstood in this country, and we can be so protective and suspicious. So well done on placating us with your depth of research. Yes, exactly, because, yep, there was a bit going on there behind the scenes. Okay, Jen says, I'm very impressed and looking forward to listening to you again. I have dingo business to attend to with my two. Thank you again, Jessica and Jenny. Talk soon. Thanks, so there you go. There you go. So I think that's all we've got now. Has anyone else got any questions, any comments? Really good. I'm absolutely blown away. And I've shared it to the pet dog trainers Europe, like Australia, PDT Australia, on my pages. There's been 17 shares on this. We've got PDT France, Jen Parker's shared it, Lee Mullen. There's lots and lots of people that have shared it. And so is there anything else you want to add, Jessica, before we sort of move on to what we'll be talking about next week?
I don't think so. If people come up with questions, they can put them in the comments, and then either I can answer them next week or answer them in the comments. But yeah, I don't think so. It was all in my presentation.
Are you proud of what you did?
Yeah, I am. After all of the research and, like you said, the sweat and hard work that went into it, yeah, I think I'm happy. Yeah,
and you're also an expert on the Maltese. And what other breeds have you done? Have you researched on there? We're on
the Beagle, the Pomeranian. Yeah, and I think, and in the Maltese, I ended up doing the history of the rest of the Bichon dogs too. No, it was the Bolognese, Jenny, remember?
Oh my God.
It was the Bolognese.
Bolognese, yeah.
Or the Bolognese, however it's meant to be said.
Well, yeah, I call it Bolognese because it's from Italy, I think, but...
that led me down the path of the Maltese and the Bichon group of dogs, so...
Exactly, and it's really interesting, like even, the Dingo's one, but I just wanted to say with, these breed researches that we do, it's pretty full on and very, very conflicting information. I know I researched the Afghan. That was quite funny because, it was all over the show, and you speak to a lot of so-called experts in their field that really couldn't answer a lot of my questions. So you've got to dig deep and cross-reference and really, really look at what you're doing because there is so much information. So.
And when you're trying to put a presentation together, like you said, you've got to cross-reference, so you have to go and look at all of your notes and go, well, that one says that and that one says that, so what other one says that and what other one says that, and therefore which one's most likely to be correct, because it's amazing how many different things.
So if I were to ask you that question, Jess, where do you think, like in doing this part of it, what would you say? Like, what do you think is probably, I mean, I know you can't answer it because you don't know, but, what makes the most sense to you?
To me, it's hard to say because they all say different things, but to me, like you were saying before, it doesn't make sense if they came, that far back as like, up to 18,000 years ago. With the sailors and the ships thing. I think it's highly likely they came from Papua New Guinea, directly to Australia. I'm not, 100% sure on how they got to Papua New Guinea, but because the New Guinea singing dog and the dingo are so similar, that would make sense to me. The fact that there's genetic traces of the dingo all throughout Indonesia and island Southeast Asia and mainland Southeast Asia suggests that they crossed each of those countries on their way down. So to me, that suggests that they, could have migrated naturally, because if they came with sailors, they might not have gone through all of those countries. I think when I was doing my research, what kind of made the most sense to me was them migrating across naturally. I think we talked about that and how that's what you had initially thought as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, and even though the archaeological evidence, you know, the oldest one is from 3,500 years ago or thereabouts, it is likely that they came to Australia before that. So yeah, I personally don't have like what I think is, you know, the probable most likely theory, because there's so much research, and like I find it just as hard to, you know, piece it all together and pick out which one would be the most likely to, but that's what would make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. That's what I sort of wrote down here out of all of it. That's sort of, but yeah, we don't know. We'll never know.
No.
But what we can do is, you know, have a little bit more respect for the dingo, understand it, listen to things like this so that we can, you know, learn more.
Yeah, I just find it really, like, you know, I personally, before starting this, didn't know a whole lot about dingoes. You know, I live in Australia and I knew that, you know, they were well known in Australia, but apart from that, like, I didn't really know much about them. And now looking at like the picture of the dingo behind you, my whole perspective is different, because they carry so much history and so much like mystery at the same time. And I think they should be more respected for that too. So yeah, doing research like this really changes your perspective on an animal too. And yeah.
Absolutely. Well, even now you're saving spiders and all sorts of things. Life has changed for Jessica.
Completely.
Yeah, completely. See, complete.
Yeah.
I just saw there, Julia said, can you please research the Shih Tzu?
Yes, Julia, I know you've asked me to research the Shih Tzu. That shall be the next one. And fingers crossed it shall not be as in depth as this one, but
well.
I shall do that next for you. Otherwise, we might have a presentation on the Shih Tzu.
Exactly. All right. So just before we say goodbye, can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect next week?
So next week I'll be talking about the characteristics of the dingo. So their physical characteristics and things like their diet, you know, mating season, breeding. So not quite as scientific and as complicated as this one, but just really interesting general information on the dingo that, yeah, people should know about the characteristics of the dingo and this animal. So yeah.
Excellent. And we know now the dingo is not a dog.
No.
We need to, yeah, so we can all go out
I think
there.
moving towards classifying them as their own separate canis species, the Canis dingo as they were originally named, is a really good idea, because well, going on how complicated their history and their origins are, like, yes, they must have evolved from the wolf, but to place them in that category, or to place them in the category of Canis familiaris dingo, linking them to domestic dogs, I don't think really is fair. Like, they should be their own separate species. And hopefully doing that would, yeah, really help in their conservation as well, like a lot of experts believe it would, so they can be recognised separate to any other dog or wild dog as their own, yeah, species.
Excellent. All right. History and mystery. I love it, she says. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining in, and I'm so glad you did, and I know you would have enjoyed it as much as I did, and I am just so proud. I can't tell you how proud I am. I know people are probably going, oh God, rave on, but yeah, this has been difficult for Jess, and you did it.
I did it.
Good for you. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for joining. And like Jess said, any questions, any comments, nice comments, she'll go in and answer those for you. And we will see you same time, same place, next Saturday evening. Thanks, Jess.
No worries. Bye.
Bye for now. Bye, guys. Yep.